I was standing in front of the full-length mirror in my wedding dress, the same lace-trimmed gown I had dreamed about since I was 12. When my phone buzzed with a message that shattered my heart into 1,000 sharp pieces. Don't bother sending me the invitation. As far as I'm concerned, you're dead to me. It was from my mother. My hands shook so violently that I almost dropped the phone. I read the words over and over, hoping I'd misread them, hoping there was a typo, hoping this was just one of her angry moods that would pass like a summer storm. But no, she meant every word. She had meant it since the day I told her I was marrying Rowan Harris. Marry a man who can give you something, she had said coldly 2 years earlier, when Rowan and I first got engaged. Not a man who needs something from you. Rowan wasn't rich. He wasn't from the right family or the right neighborhood. He was a mechanic's son who had started a small garage with his best friend. Honest, hardworking, humble. And he loved me more fiercely than anyone ever had. But for my mother, that wasn't enough. In her world, love didn't pay bills, and loyalty didn't earn respect. When I refused to call off the engagement, she escalated. She told my aunts and uncles I was throwing my life away. She called Rowan a leech at a family dinner. And the day she found out I'd set a date, she made a public announcement at a cousin's birthday party. I no longer have a daughter, she declared, her voice loud and unwavering. The girl I raised is gone. The room fell silent. And in that silence, I felt something inside me break. Not just my heart, but a lifelong belief that a mother's love was unconditional. Still, I sent her an invitation. Still, I called. I left voicemails, I begged. Please come, I whispered into the phone one night. I want you there. I want you to see me happy. But she never answered. On the morning of my wedding, when that final message came, "You're dead to me," I walked down the aisle without her. My father, long divorced from her, gave me away with tears in his eyes. Rowan held my hands and whispered, "We'll build our own family." And we did. Or at least, we tried to. But even as I built a new life, even as we bought a home, built a business, and welcomed friends who treated us like family, a part of me still ached. Every birthday card that didn't arrive, every holiday that passed without a phone call, every time I looked at the empty chair at the dinner table, it all reminded me that my mother had chosen her pride over me. Then, one rainy afternoon, 3 years after that wedding day, the phone rang. It was my aunt's voice trembling. "Vera, it's your mother." She collapsed. "They think it's her heart. She's in the hospital. I don't remember hanging up. I don't remember how I got into the car. All I know is that when we reached the hospital, Rowan was the first one through the emergency room doors. He spoke to the doctors. He filled out forms. He even called the cardiologist he knew from one of his clients. When they wheeled my mother into surgery, his hand was the one squeezing mine, steady and warm. "She'll make it," he said. "I promise," and she did. But what happened next? The weeks that followed? The words she spoke when she finally opened her eyes, and the way her heart changed when she held her first grandchild. None of it was what I expected, because sometimes, even the deepest wounds can heal. Sometimes, even the coldest hearts can soften. And sometimes, love wins in the most unexpected ways. Before we go on, tell me where you're listening from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories coming soon. I'll never forget the first time I brought Rowan home to meet my mother. We'd been dating for almost a year by then, and he had insisted it was time. "If we're serious about building a future," he said gently, "I want your family to know who I am." I agreed, nervously, and spent days convincing myself that my mother, despite her sharp opinions, would at least give him a chance. But the moment she opened the door and saw him standing beside me, her smile vanished. Her eyes narrowed with an emotion I didn't recognize. Not just disapproval, but something closer to hatred. "You," she whispered, almost under her breath. "You're her son." Rowan looked confused but extended his hand anyway. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Edwards. I've heard a lot about—" "Don't," she snapped, turning her back before he could finish. Later, I learned the truth. Rowan's mother, Veronica Harris, and her boyfriend, Derek Harris, had been my mom's college rivals, relentless bullies who humiliated her in class, mocked her background, and even stole a scholarship she had earned. My mother never forgave them, and now she saw Rowan not as the man I loved, but as the bloodline of people who once made her life miserable. "He's her son," she hissed that night. "And that means he'll hurt you too. Men like that don't change." It didn't matter that Rowan was nothing like his mother. It didn't matter that he adored me, respected me, and dreamed of building a future with me. To my mother, he was already guilty, a walking reminder of a wound she had never healed. And from that day forward, her mission was clear. She would never allow me to marry him. A week after that disastrous first meeting, my mother called me to her house under the pretense of talking things through. I arrived hopeful. Maybe, I told myself, she just needed time. Maybe once she saw how serious Rowan and I were, she would soften. But the moment I stepped into the living room, the mood was ice cold. She was sitting upright on the sofa, hands folded neatly in her lap, her face carved into the kind of expression she used when delivering final decisions. "I'm going to say this once. Vera," she began, her tone formal and clipped. "If you continue seeing that boy, you're no longer welcome in this house." The words hit me like a punch. "Mom, you don't even know him. He's kind, he's hardworking, he's Veronica Harris's son," she interrupted sharply, spitting the name like it was poison. "Do you have any idea what that woman did to me? How she laughed when I lost my scholarship? How she bragged about ruining my chances? I will not let her son ruin my daughter." I felt tears burning behind my eyes. "Rowan isn't responsible for what his mother did 30 years ago." "Blood doesn't change," she said coldly. "And if you think I'm going to stand by and watch you make the biggest mistake of your life, you're wrong. Choose Vera, him, or your family." The silence that followed was suffocating. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I wanted to believe she was bluffing, that she wouldn't actually disown me over something so irrational. But deep down, I knew my mother. Once she drew a line, she never stepped back from it. And this time, she had drawn it in steel. I left her house that evening with tears staining my cheeks and a heavy ache in my chest. Rowan was waiting for me at our favorite cafe, a worried look already in his eyes as I slid into the seat across from him. "How bad was it?" he asked softly. I sighed, struggling to keep my voice steady. "She gave me an ultimatum. Either I leave you, or I lose my family." For a moment, he didn't speak. His jaw tightened and his eyes dropped to the table. "I don't want to be the reason you lose your mother," he murmured. "If this is too much—" "Stop," I interrupted, reaching across the table to grab his hands. "You're not the problem. Her hatred for Veronica isn't your burden to carry. And I'm not going to end our relationship because she refuses to let go of the past." He exhaled deeply, but I could see the guilt still written all over his face. And over the next few weeks, that guilt began to shape how we lived. We avoided public places where we might run into my relatives. We stopped posting pictures together online. I skipped family dinners and holiday gatherings, each invitation a cruel reminder of the growing rift between me and the people I'd once been closest to. My phone calls with Mom turned into tense silences and passive-aggressive remarks. "You'll regret this one day," she'd say before hanging up. And maybe a part of me feared she was right. But every time I looked into Rowan's eyes, steady, kind, full of unwavering love, I knew I couldn't walk away. What I didn't know then was that her disapproval was only the beginning. The storm was just starting to gather. When Rowan proposed 6 months later, I thought maybe, just maybe, the reality of our commitment would soften my mother's heart. I decided to give her another chance, so I invited her to a small family dinner where we planned to share the news. It was supposed to be a joyful evening, a fresh start. But joy was the last thing on her mind. She arrived late, dressed impeccably, her lips pursed in disapproval the moment she saw Rowan sitting beside me. Throughout dinner, she barely spoke to him. When he tried to make small talk, asking about her garden, complimenting her cooking, she responded with curt one-word answers or ignored him completely. It wasn't until dessert arrived that the evening truly unraveled. Rowan, trying to bridge the distance, raised his glass and said, "I know Mrs. Edwards doesn't think much of me, but I hope one day I can earn her trust. Vera and I are getting married." The room fell silent. My heart pounded as I waited for her reaction. She set her wineglass down slowly, then stood. "Married?" she said, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. "To you, over my dead body. Mom, please," I begged. "We love each other," she laughed bitterly. "Love doesn't erase blood. I will never allow my daughter to marry the spawn of that woman. You're blinded by infatuation, Vera, but one day you'll wake up and see what a mistake you've made." Then, in front of everyone, she stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glasses rattled on the table. Rowan reached for my hand, but I pulled it away, too numb to speak. The celebration I had dreamed of had turned into a nightmare, and deep down I knew we had just crossed a point of no return. The days following that disastrous dinner were some of the hardest of my life. My phone rang nonstop. Aunts, uncles, cousins, even my father called, all echoing the same words in different tones. "Your mother is furious. You're tearing this family apart. How could you betray her like this?" It was as if I had committed a crime by falling in love. My mother stopped answering my calls altogether. When I finally showed up at her house unannounced, she didn't even open the door. She spoke through the intercom instead, her voice cold and distant. "Vera, this is your last warning. Break off the engagement, or you're no longer my daughter." I stood there on her porch in the rain, begging her to open the door. "Mom, please. He's a good man. He treats me with love and respect." "Isn't that what you want for me?" "I wanted a future for you," she snapped. "Not a repeat of my past. You have no idea what that woman did to me, and I'll be damned if I watch her son ruin your life." And with that, the line went dead. Rowan tried to console me that night as I cried in his arms. "We'll get through this," he whispered. "We'll build our own family, one that chooses love over hate." But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. If my mother could hate Rowan this much without even truly knowing him, what else was she capable of doing to stop our wedding? The weight of her resentment was growing heavier by the day, and I had a sinking feeling that she wasn't finished fighting us yet. The battle for my happiness had only just begun. As the wedding plans moved forward, my mother's opposition transformed from angry words into calculated sabotage. At first, it was small things. Relatives who had promised to help suddenly stopped returning my calls. The florist I had carefully chosen backed out mysteriously. A caterer who had confirmed the date suddenly claimed they were double booked. It didn't take long to realize who was behind it. She called and said, "You canceled," the florist admitted in a hushed tone. When I pressed for the truth, she told us the wedding was off and that we shouldn't expect payment. Rowan clenched his jaw when I told him. "She's not just upset. She's trying to destroy this wedding." I wanted to believe it was just grief, that she was acting out of misplaced love, but her actions were too deliberate. She called my father, who had been supportive, and convinced him to reconsider walking me down the aisle. She even contacted some of my friends, telling them Rowan had a dark side and warning them not to support the marriage. The final blow came when I received a letter from the church we'd booked. The officiant, a lifelong family friend, regretfully informed me he could no longer perform the ceremony. "She told me you were rushing into something dangerous," he said gently when I confronted him. "I can't be part of it." Each move was a knife to the heart. This wasn't just a mother's disapproval anymore. It was war. And for the first time, I wondered if I could actually win. But Rowan refused to let me give up. "If she wants a fight," he said, taking my hand firmly, "we'll give her one. Together." I believed him. But I also knew my mother, and she wasn't done yet. If sabotage was her first strategy, public humiliation was her second. By now, half the family had distanced themselves from me, and the ones who stayed were caught in the uncomfortable crossfire. But my mother wanted more than isolation. She wanted me shamed. It happened at my cousin Rachel's engagement party, an event I almost didn't attend. Rowan encouraged me to go. You can't hide from them forever, he said gently. Let them see you're not afraid. I walked in with my head held high, determined to prove that my love wasn't something to be ashamed of. But the whispers started the moment we entered the room. That's him. She's throwing her life away. Her poor mother. Then, as I was greeting relatives near the buffet table, my mother made her move. She stood up, champagne glass in hand, and clinked it loudly for attention. I want to make a toast, she announced, her voice sweet but sharp. To Rachel, for choosing a man worthy of her, someone who brings pride to the family name. Not everyone is so lucky, the crowd tittered uncomfortably. My face flushed, but she wasn't done. She turned toward me with a cold smile. And as for some people, she continued, I hope they realize that marrying beneath them isn't just a mistake. It's a disgrace. Gasps rippled through the room. Rowan reached for my hand, but I pulled away, humiliated beyond words. Every eye in the room was on me. Some pitying, some judgmental, none kind. I fled to the bathroom and locked the door, sobbing silently. It wasn't just disapproval anymore. It was an all-out campaign to break me, to make me regret ever loving Rowan. And for the first time, I felt the cracks forming. After the humiliation at Rachel's party, something inside me snapped. For weeks, I tried to reason with my mother, phone calls, texts, even a handwritten letter, but every attempt was met with silence or worse, more venom. The final straw came when she called my father to persuade him not to attend the wedding. She's throwing her life away, she told him. And I won't let you enable it. Thankfully, he refused. But the damage was done. Word spread through the family. And soon my inbox was filled with messages urging me to reconsider, postpone, or think of my future. It felt like the entire world was against me, and I was suffocating under the pressure. One night, after another failed attempt to reach her, I broke down completely. Rowan held me as I sobbed into his chest. Maybe she's right, I whispered through tears. Maybe I am making a mistake. Maybe I should just call it off. He cupped my face gently, his eyes searching mine. Listen to me, Vera. This isn't about right or wrong. This is about control. She's trying to make you live her story, not yours. But you have the power to write your own. His words sank deep into my heart. For the first time, I realized that this fight wasn't just about love. It was about freedom. About choosing myself and the life I wanted, even if it meant losing the family I'd always known. I took a deep breath, wiped my tears, and whispered, Then I choose us. And in that moment, something shifted. I wasn't just a daughter trying to please her mother anymore. I was a woman fighting for her future, and I wasn't going to back down. 2 weeks before the wedding, I decided to try one last time. Maybe it was foolish, maybe even desperate, but a small part of me still believed there was a chance to fix things. I couldn't walk down that aisle without knowing I had done everything I could to mend the bridge. I drove to my mother's house unannounced. My heart pounded as I stood on her porch, a bouquet of her favorite lilies trembling in my hands. When she opened the door, her face was blank. Not angry, not welcoming, just unreadable. Mom, I said softly, please. I'm not here to fight. I just want to talk. She hesitated but stepped aside to let me in. We sat at the kitchen table in silence, the same table where she once braided my hair before school and helped me study for exams. Now, it felt like enemy territory. I'm getting married, and I want you there, I whispered, my voice breaking. I need you there. I still love you, no matter what you think of Rowan. Her lips tightened. You're making a mistake, Vera, and I won't stand by and pretend I approve. Tears stung my eyes. Then don't approve. But please, don't throw me away over this. She turned away, her hands trembling slightly. You already threw me away the day you chose him? I stood slowly, realizing this was the end. Then I guess this is goodbye. As I walked out of the house, I knew, truly knew, that she wasn't coming. She had chosen her pride over her daughter, And even though it shattered me, I also knew something else. I would still walk down that aisle, with or without her. The morning of my wedding dawned bright and clear, but my heart felt heavy. My bridesmaids fluttered around me with laughter and excitement, pinning my veil and fixing my hair, but their joy felt like it was happening in another room. All I could think about was the empty chair that would sit in the front row, the one where my mother should have been. I checked my phone one last time, hoping for a message, a missed call, something. But there was nothing, just silence. When the music started and I stepped into the church, the air shifted. Everyone rose and turned to look at me. Everyone except her. My father was at my side, holding my arm tightly, his eyes soft with both pride and sorrow. "Are you ready?" he whispered. I swallowed hard. "I am." As I walked down the aisle toward Rowan, I saw love shining in his eyes, steady, unwavering, and warm. That look alone reminded me why I was doing this. Not for approval, not for acceptance, but for us. The ceremony was beautiful, heartfelt, and everything I'd dreamed of. Yet, even in the most joyful moments, when we exchanged vows, when the guests cheered our first kiss as husband and wife, there was an ache deep in my chest. At the reception, I slipped away for a moment and stood on the balcony overlooking the sunset. "I wish you were here," I whispered into the breeze. But she wasn't. She had chosen to stay away, to cling to her hatred and her pride. And as the last light faded from the sky, I made myself a quiet promise. I would not let her absence define the happiest day of my life. But I also knew our story with her was far from over. Married life with Rowan was everything I had hoped for, peaceful, steady, and built on love rather than appearances. We moved into a small townhouse on the outskirts of the city, where laughter filled the rooms and plans for the future grew with each passing day. But even as joy bloomed in our home, a shadow lingered. My mother's silence was deafening. Months turned into a year, and still we hadn't spoken. She didn't call on my birthday. She didn't congratulate us on buying our first home. And when Rowan and I announced that we were expecting our first child, the news was met with complete indifference. "It's her loss," Rowan would say gently, placing a hand on my growing belly. "If she doesn't want to be part of our lives, we'll surround this baby with people who do." And we did. Our friends became our family. My father visited often, thrilled about becoming a grandfather. Even Rowan's parents, who had every reason to resent my mother, embraced me as one of their own. Yet, at night, when the house was quiet, I often found myself scrolling through old photos of my mother and me, birthdays, school plays, holidays. I missed her more than I wanted to admit. Still, I refused to reach out again. I had begged enough. This time, if reconciliation were to happen, it would have to come from her. But fate had its own plans. Nearly 3 years after our wedding, on a crisp autumn morning, as I was setting up the nursery, my phone rang. It was my Aunt Teresa, a call that would change everything. Her voice was trembling. "Vera, it's your mother," she said. She collapsed. "They're rushing her to the hospital." And just like that, the wall between us started to crack. I don't remember the drive to the hospital, only the pounding of my heart and the icy knot in my chest. By the time we arrived, paramedics were wheeling my mother through the emergency room doors, her face pale and her breathing shallow. The sight of her like that, so small, so fragile, shattered something inside me. "Are you family?" a nurse asked urgently. "Yes," I whispered. "I'm her daughter." They rushed her into surgery almost immediately. A doctor explained that she had suffered a severe heart attack, and the next few hours would be critical. Rowan wrapped his arm around me as I stared at the double doors, my hands trembling. "She has to make it," I murmured. "We haven't fixed anything yet." To my surprise, Rowan was everywhere, speaking to doctors, calling my aunt, even contacting a cardiologist he knew through a client to review her case. He moved with purpose and calm, and in that moment I realized something profound. The man my mother despised was the one doing everything in his power to save her life. Hours crawled by. Finally, a doctor emerged with cautious relief on his face. "She's stable," he said. "The next 24 hours are critical, but we believe she'll recover." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Tears streamed down my cheeks as Rowan pulled me close. "Thank God," I whispered. We weren't allowed to see her yet, but I pressed my hand against the cold glass of the ICU window, staring at her motionless figure. "I still need you," I whispered. "Even if you hate me, I still need you." And deep down, I hoped, maybe for the first time, that she might still need me too. The next morning, my mother regained consciousness. When I walked into the ICU, she looked disoriented, weak, pale, but alive. Her eyes fluttered open, and when they met mine, there was a flicker of confusion. Then something softer. "Vera," she rasped, her voice barely audible. "I'm here, Mom," I whispered, gripping her hand gently. "You're okay. You're going to be okay." Her gaze shifted past me toward the doorway. Rowan was standing there silently, not wanting to intrude. She stared at him for a long time before finally speaking. "You," she said, her voice trembling. "Why are you here?" "Because you're my wife's mother," Rowan replied calmly. "And because I care about her." "And about you," her brow furrowed. "You shouldn't care. After everything I've said, people can hate me," he interrupted gently. "But I won't hate them back. I called the ambulance. I called the cardiologist. I just wanted you safe." Her lips parted slightly as if the words stunned her. She looked back at me, her eyes glassy. He saved me?" "Yes," I said, my voice cracking. "The man you said wasn't worthy of me. He saved your life." She closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. For the first time in years, the armor of bitterness and resentment around her seemed to crumble. "I don't deserve that," she whispered. "It's not about deserving," Rowan said softly. "It's about love." The room was silent except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor. In that stillness, something shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the faint, flickering beginning of it. For the first time, my mother wasn't looking at Rowan as her enemy's son. She was looking at him as the man who saved her life. And maybe, just maybe, the man worthy of her daughter. The days that followed were fragile, like walking across thin ice, afraid any wrong word might shatter the tentative peace forming between us. My mother remained in the hospital under observation, and I visited every day. Sometimes she was silent, staring out the window as if wrestling with years of stubborn pride. Other times she asked small questions I had once begged her to care about. "How's the baby?" she asked one afternoon, her voice soft and unsure. "Healthy," I said with a small smile, resting a hand on my growing belly. "We're almost in the 3rd trimester." She nodded slowly, her eyes distant. "I suppose I'll be a grandmother." I hesitated before answering. "If you want to be." The truth hung heavily between us. There was still anger, still hurt. But beneath it all, there was also longing, hers and mine. It was as if the years we'd spent apart were slowly unraveling, thread by thread. Rowan visited too, though he always stayed in the background, careful not to push. Each time my mother's gaze lingered on him a little longer. She even murmured a quiet, "Thank you," one evening, as he refilled her water glass, the first civil word she'd spoken to him since they met. But the real turning point came the day before her discharge. As I helped her pack her things, she took my hand unexpectedly. "I was wrong," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I let old wounds blind me, and I hurt you." "I hurt both of you," tears filled my eyes. It wasn't a full apology, not yet. But it was the first crack in a wall I had once believed was unbreakable. And through that crack, hope began to seep in. The morning she was discharged from the hospital, something felt different. My mother had always moved through life like a queen, poised, commanding, unwilling to bend. But that day she was quiet, subdued, her eyes lingering on the hospital walls as if they held the weight of her regrets. Rowan pulled the car around, and I helped her into the back seat. For most of the ride home, silence filled the space, heavy but not hostile. Finally, as the city skyline blurred past the windows, she spoke. "Vera," she said softly, almost as if she were afraid of her own voice. "I owe you an apology." I turned toward her, my breath catching. I had waited so long to hear those words that I wasn't sure I could trust them now. "I've been cruel," she continued. "I let my hatred for Veronica poison me. I convinced myself I was protecting you, but the truth is, I was trying to rewrite my past through your choices." Her voice cracked. "And in doing so, I lost my daughter." Tears welled in my eyes. "Mom, and Rowan," she added, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. "I misjudged you. I saw your mother in you when I should have seen you, the man who loves my daughter enough to risk everything for her. And for me." Rowan's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his voice steady. "All I ever wanted was a chance to be part of this family." My mother nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "If you'll still have me, I'd like that chance too." It wasn't a dramatic reunion. There were no hugs or grand declarations. But in that car, something profound shifted. A wound years in the making had finally begun to heal. For a few weeks after my mother's apology, it felt like we were standing on fragile ground. Not healed, but at least no longer enemies. She called occasionally to check on the pregnancy, and once, she even asked if we needed anything for the nursery. It wasn't warmth, but it was something. Then came the baby shower, and with it, the storm I had dreaded for months. I knew inviting both mothers was risky, but Rowan insisted. "If they're ever going to coexist, it has to start somewhere," he said. I agreed, reluctantly. What I didn't expect was how quickly old wounds would resurface the moment they were in the same room. The tension was palpable from the second they locked eyes. My mother's polite smile faltered when she saw Veronica stride in, elegant and self-assured, as if she owned the place. Veronica, for her part, greeted my mother with a tight, insincere hug. "Well, well," she said with a smirk. "I never thought you would be part of my family." My mother stiffened. "Believe me, neither did I." The civility lasted all of 10 minutes before the conversation turned sharp. Veronica made a passive-aggressive comment about people who hold grudges from their failed youth, and my mother fired back about bullies who hide behind wealth. Soon, decades of resentment spilled out. Scholarship betrayals, cruel jokes, humiliations long buried but never forgotten. The room fell silent as they shouted across the table. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Rowan and I tried to intervene, but the damage was done. By the end of the night, both mothers stormed off, and the fragile bridge we had started to build cracked under the weight of the past. It was clear now. Forgiveness was still a long way off. The fallout from the baby shower was worse than I feared. My phone buzzed with messages the next morning, one from Veronica, furious that my mother had disrespected her under her son's roof, and one from my mother, declaring she wanted nothing more to do with that woman. Both insisted they were only protecting me and their grandchild. But the truth was painfully clear. This wasn't about me at all. It was about a decades-old rivalry they still weren't ready to let go of. Rowan tried to brush it off. "They'll cool down," he said, though I could tell from the tension in his jaw that he didn't believe his own words. But they didn't cool down. They escalated. A week later, Veronica showed up at our house unannounced, insisting we not let my mother near the baby when she was born. "She's manipulative, Vera. She'll poison your child against us just like she poisoned you." 2 days after that, my mother called in tears, saying she couldn't believe I was letting that viper back into your life. I was caught in the middle, and it was tearing me apart. Rowan and I began to argue, small, sharp disagreements at first, then bigger ones that left us sleeping on opposite sides of the bed. "She's my mother too," he snapped one night. "I can't just cut her out of my life. And she's the reason my mom hates you." I shot back. "We wouldn't even be in this mess if it weren't for her." Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. It was then I realized this wasn't just a battle between two women anymore. It was starting to infect us. And with our baby's due date approaching, the thought terrified me, because families break from the inside long before they shatter on the outside. The tension in our home grew thicker with every passing week. What had once been a sanctuary of laughter and shared dreams now felt like a war zone, one where Rowan and I were no longer fighting side by side but across enemy lines. We argued about everything: who would be allowed in the delivery room, whether both grandmothers would see the baby, even what last name our child should carry. But beneath all those surface fights lay one festering truth: the bitterness between our mothers was tearing us apart. One night, after yet another heated argument, Rowan finally exploded. "I'm sick of apologizing for things my mother did decades ago," he shouted. "I'm not her. And neither is our baby. And I'm sick of being the referee," I shot back, tears streaming down my face. "I shouldn't have to choose between my husband and my mother. But that's exactly what they're forcing me to do." The silence that followed was worse than the yelling. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, the weight of everything pressing down on us. The love was still there, deep and undeniable, but so was the exhaustion. "I don't want our child to grow up in the middle of this hate," I whispered finally. "I don't want their first memories to be of people who can't stand to be in the same room." Rowan sighed, his anger dissolving into weariness. "Then maybe we have to make a choice for them, even if it means cutting both of them out." The words hung in the air, terrifying and liberating all at once. And as the baby's due date drew closer, I realized he might be right. If we couldn't stop the cycle, maybe we had to end it. The day I went into labor was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Instead, it began with chaos. Contractions hit me at 2 a.m., sharp and relentless. Rowan rushed to grab the hospital bag, fumbling with his keys, while I clutched the doorframe and breathed through the pain. We made it to the hospital just as dawn broke, exhausted, terrified, and exhilarated all at once. But as soon as word spread, the battlefield shifted from our living room to the maternity ward. Both mothers arrived within an hour, and the air grew electric. "I want to be in the delivery room," my mother insisted, clutching my hand. "No way," Rowan's mother snapped. "I should be the one there. She's giving birth to my grandchild." "Your grandchild?" my mother hissed. "This is my daughter's moment. You weren't even supposed to be part of this family in the first place. And you raised a daughter who trapped my son into marrying her." Their voices sliced through the sterile hospital air. Nurses exchanged nervous glances, and Rowan looked like he might collapse from the stress. I, however, had reached my limit. "Both of you, out." My voice was hoarse but commanding. "If you can't stop fighting for 5 minutes, you don't deserve to be here when my child enters the world." Security escorted them to the waiting room while I labored for 14 grueling hours. And when our daughter, little Ivy, finally let out her first cry, the chaos faded into insignificance. But I knew this wasn't the end. The war between our families wasn't over. It was merely on pause. And as I held Ivy in my trembling arms, I vowed that she would never inherit that hate. 3 days after Ivy's birth, I was still recovering, sore, exhausted, and overwhelmed when the next chapter of the family storm arrived. Both mothers requested to visit separately. I agreed, but I underestimated how impossible it would be to control what came next. My mother came first, carrying a handmade quilt and tears in her eyes. She hovered over Ivy's crib, touching her tiny fingers with trembling hands. "She's perfect," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Just perfect." For a moment, it felt like the ice around her heart was melting. But then she saw Rowan walk in. "Don't let her mother near this baby," she muttered under her breath. "God knows what kind of poison she'll whisper." "Mom," I sighed, "this isn't about her. This is about Ivy. She deserves all her family, not just the parts you approve of." Her eyes hardened. "She doesn't need the family of the man who ruined my life." Later that afternoon, Rowan's mother came. She too wept when she saw Ivy, but her tears quickly turned into barbed words. "I hope she grows up nothing like your side," she said, glaring at me. Weak, manipulative, vindictive. Rowan lost his temper. "Mom, stop! If you can't respect my wife, you don't get to see my daughter." Both visits ended in disaster. The joy of bringing Ivy home had been tainted by venom and unresolved grudges. That night, Rowan and I sat in silence, staring at our sleeping daughter. "This isn't working," I whispered. "If we keep letting them near her like this, we'll destroy her childhood before it even begins." Rowan nodded grimly. "Then maybe they don't see her. Not until they change." It was a painful decision, but for Ivy's sake, it was the only one. The next morning, after a sleepless night filled with tears and whispered arguments, Rowan and I made a pact. No more toxicity. Not around Ivy, not in our home. If our mothers wanted to be part of our daughter's life, they would have to earn that right, by leaving the past in the past. I called my mother first. My hands trembled as I held the phone. "Mom," I said firmly, "I love you. But you can't keep poisoning every moment with your hatred. If you want to see your granddaughter again, you need to let go of the past with Rowan's family." Her voice was cold and sharp. "You're asking me to forgive the man who ruined my life. The man who mocked me, humiliated me, made me afraid to show my face on campus." "No," I replied softly. "I'm asking you to choose me, to choose Ivy, to be a grandmother, not a grudge holder." There was silence, long, heavy silence, before she hung up without a word. Rowan's call with his mother went no better. "You're choosing her over your family?" she demanded. "I'm choosing my daughter's future," he said. "And that future doesn't include hate." For weeks, we heard nothing. No calls, no visits, no attempts at reconciliation. It hurt deeply, deeper than either of us wanted to admit. I cried while nursing Ivy. Rowan buried himself in work to avoid the emptiness. But in that silence, something remarkable happened. We grew stronger, closer, united. It was us against the world now, our tiny family of 3. And deep down, I sensed the story wasn't over. Hate could hold on for decades, but love had a way of finding cracks in even the hardest hearts. We just had to wait. 3 months passed with no word from either side. Life had settled into a bittersweet rhythm. Late-night feedings, diaper changes, and tiny giggles that melted our hearts. Yet every milestone, every new thing Ivy did, carried a shadow, the absence of her grandmother's. Then, one rainy afternoon, my phone rang. It was my mother. For a long moment, I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I almost didn't answer, but something inside urged me to pick up. "Hello?" My voice was cautious. There was silence. Then a shaky breath. I saw a picture of the baby online," she said, her voice softer than I'd heard in years. "She looks just like you did." I swallowed hard. "She has Rowan's eyes." "Maybe," she murmured. Another pause. "I've been thinking..." Maybe I let my anger go on too long. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest she'd ever come. And before I could respond, she added, Could I see her? Just once?" I hesitated. The memory of her cruel words, the venom she'd spat at the hospital, still lingered. But I also heard something new in her voice. Regret. "Let's meet in a public place," I said finally. "Neutral ground. A park, maybe," she agreed. That night, Rowan received a similar call from his mother. The conversation was tense but civil. She too wanted to meet Ivy. "I can't stop thinking about her," she admitted. And I might have been too harsh. We were cautious, suspicious even, but we agreed. Something was shifting. After months of icy silence, the first signs of thaw were appearing. Neither of us dared to hope too much. But deep down, a small spark had been lit. Maybe, just maybe, healing was possible. We arranged the meeting for a sunny Saturday morning at Willow Park, a neutral, open place where the past couldn't suffocate us. I dressed Ivy in a soft yellow onesie and wrapped her in a knitted blanket my mother had made years ago. My heart pounded the entire drive there. When we arrived, my mother was already on a bench, clutching a bouquet of daisies, my childhood favorite. She looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow, as if the weight of her anger had finally started to crush her. "Hi, Mom," I greeted quietly. Her eyes went straight to Ivy. "May I?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded and carefully placed my daughter in her arms. The moment Ivy's tiny fingers curled around hers, something broke inside my mother. Tears streamed down her face. "I never thought I'd hold my granddaughter," she whispered. I told myself I didn't care, but I was lying. We sat in silence as she rocked Ivy gently, the years of bitterness softening with every coo and every tiny smile. Then, unexpectedly, she said, "I hated Rowan not because of who he is, but because of who his father was. And I hated myself for never letting go." Just then, Rowan approached, carrying coffee and holding his mother's hand. She had agreed to join us, too, a decision that had taken weeks of convincing. The air immediately thickened when the two women locked eyes. "Margaret," Rowan's mother said stiffly. "Veronica," my mother replied. Neither smiled. Neither offered forgiveness. But neither walked away. And in that tense, fragile silence, they both stared at the same baby, their shared blood, their shared future. No apologies were exchanged, no hugs. But it was a start, the first shaky step towards something that might one day resemble peace. The fragile peace of that first meeting didn't last long. As we all sat under the shade of the old oak tree, what began as polite small talk quickly spiraled into something raw and ugly. My mother, Margaret, placed Ivy gently back into my arms and turned to Rowan's mother with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I suppose you're proud of the mess you created," she said coldly. Veronica's eyebrows arched. "Proud? Of raising a successful man who loves your daughter?" "Yes, I am." My mother's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Successful? Your husband nearly ruined my life, and you stood by and watched. Do you know how many nights I cried because of the things he did to me in college?" Veronica didn't back down. "And do you know how many nights I spent cleaning up after the messes your daughter caused? She turned my son against his family. You raised a troublemaker who disrespected tradition." Rowan stepped in quickly. "Enough, both of you. This isn't about the past. It's about our future and about Ivy, but neither woman was ready to let go." "This isn't over," my mother snapped. "You might think time erases cruelty, but some wounds never heal." "Then maybe you should have taught your daughter forgiveness," Veronica fired back, "instead of poisoning her with your resentment." I stood frozen, Ivy's little body pressed to my chest as their words cut through the air like knives. This wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was decades of hatred, betrayal, and humiliation resurfacing all at once. As Rowan guided his mother away, my mom turned to me with tears in her eyes. "I don't hate you, sweetheart, but I will never forgive what his family did to mine." And in that moment I realized healing wouldn't come easily, if it came at all. After the disastrous park encounter, weeks passed in tense silence. Margaret stopped answering my calls. Veronica avoided visiting altogether. And Rowan and I found ourselves stuck in the middle, exhausted mediators in a decades-old war that refused to die. "I'm done trying," I whispered one night as we sat on the couch, Ivy asleep upstairs. "Maybe it's better if we keep them both out of our lives." Rowan sighed deeply. "But that's not what you really want. You want your mom to love our daughter. And whether she admits it or not, she does." He was right. Despite her venom, my mother had looked at Ivy with a softness I hadn't seen in years. That tiny spark of love was still there, buried under anger and pride. I couldn't give up on it, but the situation escalated again when my mother unexpectedly showed up at our house. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Before I could respond, Veronica's voice echoed from the kitchen. She had stopped by earlier to bring Ivy a gift. The two women froze when they saw each other. "Of course," Margaret sneered. "The Queen is here, and the victim still plays her part," Veronica shot back. This time, I didn't let them spiral. Enough, I shouted. You two have poisoned everything for decades. Do you realize how close I am to cutting both of you out of Ivy's life? The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's eyes widened in shock. Veronica's face turned pale. For the first time, they both realized I was serious, that their hatred might cost them the one thing that could ever tie them together, their granddaughter. And that moment, that ultimatum, finally broke through their armor. 3 weeks after my outburst, I hadn't heard a word from my mother. The silence was heavy, suffocating. I told myself I was done, that if she wanted to stay in the past, that was her choice. But deep down, a small part of me still hoped she'd knock on the door. Call something? Then one rainy evening, everything changed. I was rocking Ivy to sleep when my phone rang. Rowan's name flashed on the screen, and his voice was urgent, panicked. "It's your mom," he said, breathless. "She collapsed at the market. They think it's a heart attack. I'm on my way to the hospital now." The world spun. My knees buckled as I clutched the phone tighter. "What? How? Is she alive?" he interrupted. "But it's bad. They need to stabilize her. I'll meet you there." The next hour was a blur. The rush to the hospital with Ivy bundled in her car seat, my heart pounding with terror and regret. When I arrived, Rowan was already speaking with a doctor. "He's the one who called the ambulance," a nurse explained. "If he hadn't acted so quickly, she might not have made it." I stared at my husband, the man my mother despised, the son of her old enemy, and felt tears sting my eyes. When I was finally allowed into the ICU, she lay fragile and pale, tubes snaking from her arms. She looked nothing like the fiery, stubborn woman I knew. I took her hand gently. "Please don't go," I whispered. "I'm not ready to lose you." Her eyelids fluttered. When they opened, her gaze found Rowan in the doorway. "You," she rasped. "Did he save me?" I nodded, tears burning. A single tear slipped down her cheek, the first crack in a wall that had stood for decades. The following morning, the steady rhythm of beeping monitors was the only sound in my mother's hospital room. I'd barely slept, curled up in a stiff chair beside her bed with Ivy nestled in my arms. Rowan had stayed through the night, too, pacing the corridor, checking her vitals every hour. When Margaret finally stirred, the first thing her eyes fell on was Ivy, gurgling softly in my lap. Then she turned to Rowan, and for the first time in years, there wasn't hatred in her gaze. There was confusion, gratitude, maybe even shame. "You called the ambulance?" she asked weakly. Rowan nodded. "I did, and I'll do it again if I have to. Your family, whether you accept me or not." She stared at him for a long moment. Then her lips quivered, as if she were swallowing words that refused to come out. Finally, she whispered, "I spent so many years hating you. Because of him." We knew who she meant. Rowan's father, the man who had humiliated her in college and made her life miserable. She had never forgiven him. And when she learned that Rowan was his son, she'd projected decades of unresolved anger onto him. "I wanted to protect my daughter from the same pain I suffered," she continued, her voice trembling. "But instead, I became the one causing it." The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't hostile. For the first time, it felt like the weight of the past was lifting, one confession at a time. Rowan reached for her hand gently. "I'm not my father. I never will be. And all I've ever wanted is to love your daughter, and this family." Margaret's eyes welled with tears. Maybe it's time I let you." It was small. It was tentative, but it was the first real step toward healing. Over the next few days, my mother's recovery was slow but steady. I spent most of my time at the hospital, reading to her, feeding her soup, holding her hand when the pain became too much. But the biggest change wasn't physical, it was emotional. The icy distance between us had begun to thaw. One afternoon, as Ivy napped peacefully in her stroller and Rowan stepped out to grab coffee, my mother motioned for me to sit closer. Her hand, still frail but warmer now, covered mine. I owe you an apology, she said softly. Not just for the last few months, but for years. I held my breath, unsure if I was ready to hear what would follow. When you told me you were marrying Rowan, I felt betrayed. Not because of who he was, but because of where he came from. His father, he ruined my life in college. He mocked me, humiliated me in front of everyone. And when I finally thought I was free of him, fate brought his son into my daughter's life. I saw history repeating itself. Tears welled in her eyes. But I was wrong. Rowan isn't his father, and you aren't me. You built a life based on love, not revenge, and I was too blinded by my past to see that. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Mom, I never needed you to forget the past. I just needed you to be part of my future. For the first time in years, she pulled me into her arms. The hug was shaky, hesitant, but it was real. I want to be, she whispered, if you'll still let me. And with that, decades of resentment started to crumble, replaced by something fragile and new, the possibility of forgiveness. But just as things were starting to heal between me and my mother, another storm was brewing, one that had been waiting for decades. Veronica, Rowan's mother, arrived at the hospital the following morning, uninvited as always, with her signature perfume filling the corridor before she even entered the room. Well, look at that, she said coldly as she stepped inside. The woman who swore she'd never have anything to do with my family is now depending on us to keep her alive. Rowan immediately stepped between us, but my mother raised a trembling hand. It's fine, Rowan, she said. I think it's time Veronica and I talked. Really talked. The air grew heavy as the two women faced each other, decades of unresolved bitterness simmering beneath their polite smiles. You still haven't changed, Veronica sneered. Still self-righteous, still convinced you're better than everyone else. And you, my mother replied evenly, are still the same bully you were at 20. The difference is I no longer care what you think of me, Veronica laughed bitterly. You hated my husband, and now you're clinging to his son. I don't cling to anyone, my mother shot back. And I never hated Rowan. I hated the cruelty his father inflicted on me. But I see now that Rowan is nothing like him. I was wrong to judge. For a moment, Veronica's confidence faltered. The truth was out in the open, raw and undeniable. You'll never be part of this family, she hissed. My mother smiled almost serenely. I already am. Because my daughter is, and because Rowan wants me here. It was the first time I'd ever seen Veronica speechless. And in that silence, I realized something. The war between them wasn't just ending. We were finally winning. After Veronica stormed out of the hospital room, slamming the door behind her, an eerie quiet settled over us. My mother sighed heavily, leaning back against the pillows, looking both exhausted and relieved. I didn't think that day would ever come, she murmured. I sat beside her, still processing everything that had just happened. You've been carrying that hatred for decades, I said softly. It's no wonder it's been so hard to let go. She gave a small, sad smile. Hatred is heavy, my dear. It weighs you down and poisons everything, even the people you love. I thought if I held on to it, I'd stay strong. But all I did was push you away. Her words struck me deeply. I had spent years aching for her approval, desperate for her blessing. And now I realized she had been fighting her own demons all along. Rowan returned with coffee and stood quietly by the doorway listening. We can't change the past, he said gently, but we can decide what we do next. My mother looked at both of us, at me, at the man I loved, and at the tiny bundle sleeping peacefully in the stroller. You're right, she said, her voice trembling. I want to be part of this family, if you'll have me. Tears filled my eyes as I reached for her hand. We already do, Mom. We always have. For the first time, the weight between us, the judgment, the resentment, the unspoken wounds, felt lighter. This wasn't the neat, happy ending I once dreamed of. It was messier, scarred by years of pain. But it was real. And in that moment, I knew we were choosing the future over the past. Together. 2 weeks later, Mom was discharged from the hospital. The doctors called her recovery remarkable, and I knew deep down that it was more than medicine. It was the healing of something deeper, her heart. We invited her to stay with us while she regained her strength. At first, the idea made me nervous. Our home had never truly been hers. It was where Rowan and I had built a life she once rejected. But she accepted without hesitation, and when she walked through our door, she did so without the usual judgment in her eyes. The first morning, I found her in the nursery, holding Ivy gently against her chest. She was humming an old lullaby I hadn't heard since childhood. When she noticed me, her eyes softened. "She looks just like you when you were a baby," she said quietly. "So full of possibility." "She'll grow up with love," I replied. "From everyone." Mom nodded, and after a long pause, she said, "I'd like to make peace with Rowan, too." The moment he came home from work, she asked if they could speak privately. I watched from the kitchen, my heart pounding as the two people I loved most, and who had clashed the hardest, finally sat face to face. "I was unfair to you," she admitted. "I judged you for your father's sins, not for the man you are. But you saved my life, and you've made my daughter happy. That's more than I could have asked for." Rowan's eyes softened. "I never wanted to replace anyone. I just wanted to be part of this family." And with that, the last of the old walls between us crumbled. My mother extended her hand, and Rowan took it, sealing a peace that had once felt impossible. A month later, with Mom fully recovered and our relationship stronger than it had ever been, Rowan suggested something bold, something that, a year earlier, would have felt impossible. "Let's host a family dinner," he said. "All of us. No tension, no grudges. Just a chance to start over." I hesitated. Memories of past disasters, cold stares, sharp words, tears behind closed doors, flashed through my mind. But when I mentioned it to Mom, she surprised me by smiling. "I think it's time," she said. "If we're going to move forward, we need to do it as a family." We spent days preparing. The table was set with our best china. Ivy's toys were tucked away, and the aroma of roasted chicken and herbs filled the house. As the doorbell rang, my heart raced. Rowan's parents were the first to arrive. Veronica's eyes flicked over the decorations with her usual air of superiority. But even she seemed subdued, perhaps by the confrontation at the hospital, or by the undeniable truth that her son and I were stronger together than ever. Then came my cousins, aunts, and even a few distant relatives who hadn't spoken to Mom in years. The room was soon filled with chatter, laughter, and, to my surprise, warmth. Halfway through dinner, Mom rose from her seat. "I want to say something," she announced, her voice steady. The room fell silent. For too long, I let pride and anger guide me. I hurt my daughter, and I misjudged the man she loves. But tonight, I want to leave all that behind. This is our family, and I'm proud to be part of it. The room erupted into applause. And in that moment, surrounded by people who had once been divided by bitterness, I realized something powerful. Reconciliation wasn't just possible. It was already happening. After that dinner, something shifted forever. My mother, once a distant and judgmental figure, began showing up in ways I had always dreamed of. She offered to babysit Ivy so Rowan and I could have a night out. She came by on Sundays with homemade pies and stories from her youth. And for the first time, she asked questions, real questions about my life, my dreams, and even about Rowan's work. One afternoon, as I watched her rocking Ivy to sleep in the nursery, I felt a wave of emotion I hadn't expected. I used to envy friends who were close to their moms, I admitted. I thought I'd never have that. She looked up, her eyes glistening. I thought I'd never have a second chance, she whispered. But I do, and I won't waste it. It wasn't just her relationship with me that changed. She slowly softened toward Rowan, too. She began inviting him to help her with errands, asking about his childhood, and even sharing old recipes she thought he'd like. One evening, I found the two of them laughing over a pot of stew in the kitchen, something I once thought I'd never see. But not everything was perfect. Veronica remained stubborn, refusing to fully embrace my mother or the new dynamic. And yet even she couldn't deny the transformation. "Your mother's different," she admitted one night begrudgingly. "I still don't like her, but I can see she's trying." And she was. Every visit, every conversation, every quiet apology woven into small acts of love proved that. For years, I had carried the pain of a fractured family. Now, watching my mother hum softly to my daughter, I realized we were building something entirely new, not perfect, but stronger than what had been before. It was a crisp autumn morning when the phone rang, a call that would change everything again. Rowan answered, his brow furrowing as he listened. Then he turned to me, his expression grave. "It's Veronica," he said. "She's in the hospital." The words hit harder than I expected. Despite everything, her cruelty, her pride, her relentless judgment, she was still Rowan's mother. And more importantly, she was Ivy's grandmother. Without hesitation, we rushed to the hospital. When we arrived, Veronica was lying in a hospital bed, pale and weak. Her condition was serious but stable. To my surprise, my mother was already there, sitting by her bedside. "She collapsed while shopping," she explained quietly. I was nearby and followed the ambulance. The two women exchanged a look. Not warm, but no longer icy either. It was a look that said we've been through too much to keep fighting forever. When Veronica woke, her eyes darted between us. "You didn't have to come," she muttered, her voice trembling. "Of course we did," Rowan said, taking her hand. "Your family." Even I spoke softly. "We don't leave people behind. Not anymore." Veronica's lips quivered, and for the first time she looked vulnerable. "I've been terrible to you," she admitted. "Both of you." I was so blinded by the past, I couldn't see what was right in front of me. My mother stepped forward and did something unimaginable. She took Veronica's hand. "We've all been blinded by the past," she said gently. "But maybe it's time to stop looking back." It was a moment I never thought I'd witness, the two women who had despised each other finally choosing peace. And in that sterile hospital room, our fractured family began to heal in ways I never believed possible. Veronica's hospital stay stretched into a week, and during that time, something remarkable happened. The two matriarchs who had spent decades despising one another slowly began to talk. At first, their conversations were brief and guarded. Polite inquiries about medication, quiet comments about Ivy's smile, or remarks about the weather. But as the days passed, those surface-level exchanges turned into something deeper. One afternoon, I walked into the room to find them sitting together, not as rivals, but as two women bound by love for the same family. My mother was speaking softly, her voice tinged with regret. "I hated you for what happened back then," she confessed. "Your husband made my college years miserable. And when I saw Rowan, I saw him. It wasn't fair, to you or to my daughter." Veronica sighed, her eyes fixed on the window. "And I hated you for taking my son. I thought you were trying to erase me from his life. Maybe I was jealous. Maybe I was afraid." There was a long silence, broken only by the sound of monitors beeping softly. Then Veronica reached out and took my mother's hand. "We both made mistakes. But if you're willing, maybe we can fix this." My mother's eyes softened. "For them," she said, glancing at me, Rowan, and little Ivy in the corner. "For our family." I swallowed hard, tears pricking my eyes. I had spent so many years imagining this moment, a fragile peace built not on denial but on understanding. And now it was happening right before me. They didn't hug, they didn't cry, but in that quiet gesture, two hands clasped, old enemies finally laying down their weapons, I knew we had crossed a threshold. We were no longer two families divided. We were one, healing together. 6 months later, life felt entirely different, softer, fuller, and warmer than I ever imagined it could be. Our family, once split into hostile camps, now shared Sunday dinners without icy stares or biting remarks. Veronica and my mother still had their moments, an occasional sharp comment here, a disapproving glance there, but they were learning, growing, trying. And for the first time in decades, that was enough. The biggest change came on Ivy's first birthday. We held a small gathering at our home, just close friends and family. As I looked around the room, I saw scenes I once believed were impossible. My mother and Veronica working side by side in the kitchen, laughing quietly over frosting mishaps. Rowan's father handing me a plate of food with a genuine smile. My cousins and in-laws chatting as if they had always belonged in the same room. During the toast, Rowan raised his glass and spoke from the heart. "This year wasn't easy," he said, glancing at me with a smile. "But it taught us what family really means. It's not about blood or grudges or the past. It's about showing up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." My mother and Veronica shared a look. This time, not of resentment, but of mutual understanding. And then Veronica did something that stunned everyone. She stood, took the microphone, and said, "I want to thank my daughter-in-law. I was wrong about you, about both of you. You didn't destroy this family. You saved it." Tears blurred my vision as the room erupted into applause. That night, after everyone had gone home and Ivy was asleep, I sat on the porch with Rowan. "We made it," I whispered. He squeezed my hand. "No," he said gently. "We built it!" And he was right. What once felt broken beyond repair was now something beautiful. A family forged not by perfection, but by forgiveness, love, and the courage to begin again. If you liked this story, please like, subscribe, and share it. If you have a unique story of your own, share it in the comments below. Thank you for listening.